Hi everyone, Schizoid Inks here. Usual, mundane, boring self that I am. I am here, and I'm here to talk to much more interesting people than me. I have Dr. Elinor Greenberg and Karen Arluck, LCSW. I see it's right there. Was it there last time? I don't remember. It's actually listed up there. That's nice. Because I was like trying to remember the acronym for a second there, and I almost did it. So, but in any case, we're here to talk about a few different things. One thing that I had in mind in particular was the topic of schizoid PD in association with other comorbids and how, because of the nature of schizoid PD, and it's known for its very kind of what's the word, low affect nature, and it's more kind of reserved, private, obviously aspects, how some of these other types of comorbids might manifest or exhibit in more subtle ways, maybe. But anyway, that's going to be the topic at hand. But before we do all that, I'd like, for the people that have never seen this before, Karen and Elinor, whatever order you want, just a quick introduction of what you do and what you're about. And I'm sure they probably already know because they probably watched the last two videos, but nonetheless, just in case, you never know who will stumble across it. So go for it.
I'll start. I'm Dr. Elinor Greenberg. I'm a licensed psychologist. The laws of the states that I'm licensed in say that I have to say I'm a licensed psychologist. They're very strict on that. I'm a member of the New York Institute for Gestalt Therapy, and I'm on the faculty at the Gestalt Center for Psychotherapy and Training, where I developed and teach an 8-session course, personality adaptations for the psychoanalytic tract of clients. Of trainees. And I also teach internationally, remotely these days. And I've become very, very interested in schizoid adaptations because I feel it's a greatly neglected part of the personality disorder array, if you want to put it that way. I'm not really fond of the word disorder, but that's what you're going to find if you try and look up.
I know, same. Trust me. You already know my problems with this.
Like, all right.
Yeah,
so I'm on here just to spread information and have a good time. How's that?
Sounds good. Let's spread some good info. All right, Karen, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Karen Arluck. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm a psychotherapist in private practice, and I specialize in personality disorders, specifically schizoid, borderline, and narcissistic, and adaptations, and as well as relationships with people who have these themes. And I'm in private practice, and I also particularly like talking about this area because I think it is one of the most misunderstood among the cluster B sort of family, where people don't hear about it often unless they're looking for it specifically, or if they do look it up, it's often misunderstood. So I really like talking about it and sharing what I know and learning and having conversation with you guys.
If my voice sounds a little scraggly and like harsh and I sound a little tired, it's probably because I have COVID. And the show must go on. That's just how there is to it. Got to do what you got to do. So just excuse that so that nobody in the comments is like, why do you sound sick? I'm like, that's probably why. In any case, what I wanted to start with was, I guess, one subject or one comorbidity that we've often brought up, we've often talked about, and you guys are probably extra familiar with. And that's what you term, I believe, Elinor, the Narzoid, right? So,
Yeah.
yes, I'm curious as to how do you define that? What is a Narzoid?
Well, I'll say this very loosely. It's more like I had these repeated experiences. I'd have a client, and now I'm mushing together batches of clients and trying to keep information private. But pretty much the same thing happened. I'd have someone that superficially was engaging in what appeared to be narcissistic type acts or concerns. I had a number of male clients that were spending a lot of time in the gym, getting the perfect six-pack or muscles or things like that. And then they were spending an awful lot of time on work or some other hobby. But when it came to the dating area, and this is where I got confused, what were they doing all the prep for? Now they were earning a good living, they were looking gorgeous, but they just never had time to really get serious about anyone else. So they were mostly, when I inquired about their romantic or sexual life, they were basically having sex with strangers that they met, or having a few dates with somebody, but nothing ever went anywhere, which they claimed they wanted it to go somewhere. So they weren't devaluing of me, which would have been more on the narcissistic end, but they had an extreme concern with getting ahead at work and making their body as perfect as possible. And that didn't, I was a bit puzzled, because when I'm trying to do a differential with something that's schizoid, most of the schizoid people I know, and by the way, people love the way that you guys have cut it into zoids. So many people have told me that sounds way cooler and way more inviting to be part of a zoid group than to label myself schizoid. So when I was trying to think about what's the best treatment, how shall I speak to them, which is my countertransference piece that allows me also to know diagnoses. If I get really super careful and don't want to say anything direct or intrusive, and I'm going to signal if I'm going to get up and move, and I'm going to talk about where I'm going to be sitting so everything is predictable, I'm automatically going into the mode that I go into when I'm with a schizoid client. It's very automatic for me. And they go, oh, I'm treating them as if they're schizoid, despite their six-pack, all their aspirations to be the best that they're telling me about. Emotionally, energy-wise, I'm not afraid of becoming devalued or something like that, or not giving them their due because of their status. I'm more concerned now with making them physically, emotionally comfortable, not schizoid language, the way I was taught by Ralph Klein, is who used to be director of training at the Masterson Institute and who wrote the material on schizoids in most of Masterson's collections, and who combined his thinking with Masterson's. He had basically said, you can say anything you like to somebody who you believe has schizoid personality disorder. They called it disorder of the self. However, you need to own it as your own thoughts and something that you're thinking, and not as the truth about them in any way, and leave plenty of room for them to disagree or share their thoughts, and wait for agreement. So that would look like, if I were doing it with you right now, and people who have watched the others have heard me talk about that, it would look like something like, gee, Angst, I was thinking after our last meeting with Karen and you about something that you said. I was wondering whether you'd be interested in hearing it, as opposed to just saying, hey, Angst, this is what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
So if I go into number one and not number two, I do it rather automatically, and I begin to wonder, well, why did I go there? I mean, what am I seeing? What am I thinking?
What about your intuitions there as a psych too?
Yeah. And so that's another thing that is puzzling. Someone presents superficially as a narcissist, but I feel the need to give them advance notice of pretty much everything I'm going to say.
Space and everything else that you normally
Exactly.
would. Yeah.
So that's an interesting phenomenon. That's what one of the things that made me notice it. And the second was the punchline that all these different stories had when I asked about their success at work, is these people have been alone for 20 years. I mean, that's a slight exaggeration. Even the ones that were married had jobs that took precedence over the relationship in the wife's mind and the children's mind, because they had to work, they had to travel for work. And most of my clients who want more interaction with their family find a way to not travel so much for work. So the fact is, however they describe their reasons, they've spent a lot of their life alone in hotel rooms or at work past the time when other people generally leave work. And they have very little personal friends that they want to spend time with. And so the fact is they're basically a loner in many, many ways, but they're not describing themselves as a loner. They're not owning that part of them.
Interesting. I'm already
So,
like things are already bubbling in my head as to why that could be. Because I've come across similar type of stuff even on the server, or just conversations with people, like where they have a concern for these sort of superficial, as you mentioned, things, but the reasoning for it is oftentimes kind of unique. And I'd like to go into that after, but I'm curious to what Karen might have to
yeah.
say as far as the narcissistic schizoid or the narzoid, if you've come across that in any capacity.
Sure, I've come across that a lot. And typically when I first see them and they present, they've adopted a lot of narcissistic hierarchical thinking about what matters to them, whether it's about who's the most intelligent or money, appearance, who's the best looking or less good looking. And they are sort of superficially focused on that, except as I get to know them better, it becomes more about vertical distancing as opposed to wanting admiration or to be better than. It's more of a protective thing for them where they've experienced it and they've learned it as a way to um, try to assess the situation and understand where they fit in, more as an effort to create safety than to get people to look at them and admire them. But at
Yeah.
their core, they have, it's schizoid themes. They're often alone, although uh, they won't usually say it's by choice. And in fact, it doesn't feel to them like a choice, but it'll be like a series of decisions or the kind of career they're in, or it'll seem like external factors to them, but somehow it ends up with them always alone. And one of the interesting, to me, things that I've noticed about them that became an important differential diagnosis was whether or not everything is everybody else's fault or whether it's actually all their fault. And when they have sort of schizoid core themes, it comes back to everything actually being all their fault and them wanting to make sure that they're accurately depicting all of their faults to me, that I'm not thinking of them as any more positive than they are. And that they really want to be clear just how negative their traits are. And my narcissistic clients, where it's sort of narcissistic themes externally, but also internally, that doesn't happen with them.
Okay. Interesting. Fascinating. I do have some ideas as to, I know I'm just some schlub on the internet, and I wanted to bounce some ideas off you guys pertaining to what I think may be happening, in my opinion, my humble opinion. Um, in any case, what I'm curious about is this. Now, you're both saying that these narzoids are still technically seeking things like status, um, maybe power, fame, so just some kind of things related to status, right? Whether it's a good looking appearance, or appearing as attractive to others, or looking like they're powerful or wealthy or very social when they actually aren't, right? Like it's this persona that they want to magnify, right? Is that a correct characterization of what, like the superficial portion at least? Like, does it look like they're like, are they doing things to increase those things? I'm not saying what.
Well, let me just give you an example, because I mostly see very high functioning people or moderate high functioning. By that I mean they've been through school, they studied for a profession or a high paying job or even a moderate paying job, and they're making progress in it. And I'm thinking of one person who is multiply married, but the relationships in each case, the wife and the children didn't see him very often, and they complained. But he would say, I have to work. I'm doing it all for you. I'm going, but he wasn't, because he needed, when I got to know him better, a backdoor out. He felt smothered, and when he was with his family, he reported feeling like he had to please them all the time and do what his wife wanted and so forth.
Okay, that's lining up with what I'm thinking next. But continue, please. Sorry, Karen.
And some of my clients, like for example, if some of them that have been focused on appearances, not necessarily that they've put so much effort into theirs, but I've seen them be very critical of other people. So if no person of the gender that they're attracted to is quite good looking enough, then the outcome is they're alone. If this one's nose is too big, this one's this, but the sort of underlying function is that then they don't have to face intimacy or connection if nobody's quite good enough, because it's really the connection part they're afraid of. It's not about the nose.
That's assuming they could even establish it. That's what's interesting. Like like very easily, right? Even if say they didn't have these superficial excuses, right? It sounds to me, they sound like excuses. They don't sound so much like actual concerns, at least in the case of the Narzoid. This is what I'm thinking, because if they're still seeking status and they're still doing all this sort of stuff, and they're being hypercritical in order to keep people away or whatever, it sounds like they're exhibiting a lot of these narcissistic traits, but for entirely different purposes, right? Like, this is kind of what you guys are saying. But what's fascinating about it to me is like the vulnerability that still exists there, right? Even if, and it's apparent, and obviously when they talk to you guys during a private session over time, they don't have as much of an issue of making it or being aware of it as, like, say, somebody that's entirely just a narcissist, right? Internally and externally, like you described, right? They're actually able to kind of like look at their behaviors and go, these are not so great, and talk about them without necessarily believing that those, or convincing themselves that those behaviors are all good behaviors, right? Regardless of you know, some of the negative attention or some of the hurt they may cause in some respects. But what's interesting is I imagine somebody, and I've talked to people like this, I've talked to schizoids like this, but I imagine somebody working out, going up in power, making money, doing all the things that would normally fulfill somebody that has this need, this hole to fill, and they fill it with status, right? That they aren't really getting filled with anything a lot of the time, right? Like, I feel like it's more of a strategy to stay away, to be safe, perhaps. In another case, it might just be because they feel alienated or uncomfortable or odd or disconnected, if you will, from people in general that they come across. So what's the easiest way to keep people away and to actually get them to leave you alone, but to be high status and to be like having money, status, and being attractive gets you what you want. And with what you want is for people to leave you alone, you're going to get that, right? And that's what's interesting to me, right? Like, I can imagine a schizoid that maybe developed this notion that that was the only path to isolation, or the only path to, being set apart without causing problems is
And I
for
add
them.
something because
Yeah, this is just my thoughts.
it's along the lines, but it's not quite.
Okay.
What I'm thinking about one of my clients now that I never really got a straight diagnosis on. Different things would emerge at different times, but a number of the clients, it wasn't isolation they sought safety.
Okay.
And the safety, isolation was a solution to the safety issues,
Yeah.
not vice versa.
Oh, okay. I see
So-
what you're saying. I see what you're.
And there's different ways, because the reason is I'm thinking of one person now, well, I'm thinking of a few people now, that their path to safety, and what they meant by safety is they had been bullied, they had a narcissistic parent or two, they had felt inadequate and in a variety of ways, and bullied again in junior high and middle school and things like that. And they, because of the narcissistic parent, they in fact, they felt intruded upon by their parents as well. And so the only way that they could imagine in the beginning of therapy was by becoming a billionaire. So their desire was I had a number of clients that said they needed to become billionaires. They needed to become fabulous wealthy. They could probably do it on the internet in some fashion that they weren't doing, actually.
Yeah.
And that when I inquired about it, it was, if I'm a billionaire, I can do what I want. I don't have to worry about inheriting money from my parents. If I want to leave the nest, I can stay as far from them, for much further than they really want me to be. And I can put protection around me. Nobody can really reach me. If you have that much money, you can live the life you want, and you can keep people from having access to you or invite them in, depending on the deal.
Yes.
However, this was an entirely unrealistic fantasy. Not that these people weren't smart enough. It's not like they were less smart than the people making lots and lots of money. Is that they were paralyzed, and they actually, if you looked at what they were doing, they moved from their home state somewhere else. They moved somewhere else. They were always alone. They saw people on the street. They didn't seek out relationships with them. One person ended up in a relationship, more or less, after a few years of therapy. But when I met them, there was this fantasy that I have to do something amazing, and it has to be so amazing that it gives me freedom from my family and from everyone else, and that'll earn me billions of dollars. And meanwhile, the person was alone, living alone, different cities, living alone, and not reaching out to people and making friends, and had severed the ties to friends from what little friendships that they had when they were younger, people who were interested in them because they didn't believe the interest was genuine, or their self-esteem was so low that they couldn't imagine it. I mean, you did a low self-esteem intro.
Oh yeah. Well, self-deprecation's funny. So.
But it's also what people use to comfort. If you don't mind me saying this, I often say you can get your diagnosis in the first 10 or 20 minutes of meeting someone under an anxiety-provoking situation, because when people are anxious, they double down and they do an exaggerated version of what their defense is against whatever they're anxious about. So if someone doubles down on self-deprecation in the first 10 minutes, they're doing it before I can deprecate them. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, you could if you want to. I'm also indifferent
Or before the audience. No, I mean, it's a protection. I have no intention of it, except in hoping that I'm not making, I didn't ask your permission, because you gave me permission a while back, 2 or 3 things before saying something personal. So I used an example, which my fantasy is that made you uncomfortable.
Oh no, I'm not uncomfortable, but I mean, now talking about being uncomfortable made me uncomfortable probably a little, but even because I'm not. And then for me, like, one of the things that a lot of Zoids have issues with And one of the things I would say that makes them uncomfortable is that when, even if it's not intentional, when people misattribute their motivations, like that's a common like trigger, I guess, for a lot of schizoids, right? Or even if they're mistaken in some regard or another about motivations, or even that person doesn't believe it, even if it is the case and that person doesn't believe the assertion that is being made about their behavior, it makes them makes a lot of schizoids uncomfortable because it's another reminder of the alienation they often feel when they're around people that they can't connect to, generally speaking. Um, but that's why I was interested, because you differentiated safety from isolation, right? And that isolation is just a method in which they could find safety can occur, right? And then so my question is, what safety from what, right? And oftentimes the way it's described is, and this is where I guess I differ, and my own theories differ, is that it's not so much safety from pain that's being inflicted upon them by others, but safety from the sense of um, inhumanity or disconnect that many of them deal with when they are around others, because of this lack of connection that everyone else keeps talking about and experiencing, that they themselves aren't adept at experiencing or even feeling in any capacity. And it's funny because I've often said, even on stream, I've said, if I had millions of dollars, all I would use it for would be to fund my project and to stay away from everyone that I don't like.
Okay,
So,
so
or most people in general, like I would just be an online figure and I would never have to interact with a single human being outside of like my family in real life. So that would be wonderful for me. But so I've heard that many times before. That's a common thing, even on the server, where people said, "Oh, I wish I had money just to be left alone. I wish I had power just to be left alone. I wish I had these things to be." It's never about the status itself. The status itself is worthless oftentimes to them. Were they able to achieve these things without any of that status? They probably would. But it's in this world, status is everything, unfortunately. And in order to accomplish certain tasks, it's only viable, especially if you want to still continue down whatever roads you want to continue down, unless you want to become like a hermit in a cabin, which is not ideal even for somebody that wants to be alone, right? Maybe they don't want to be a hermit in a cabin. They want to be in technology and in a city, but they want to be left alone by that city that they inhabit and that world of technology that they inhabit. Sorry for the rambling, you know how I am. But I'm curious, Karen, what do you think is the motivation for wanting, like what are they trying to be safe from? If somebody is a narcissistic schizoid or whatever, if they're doing these things in order to find safety, to separate themselves vertically, like Elinor described, um, what are they trying to stay away from, in your opinion? What is the safety from exactly?
A number of things. So I think it's safety from being hurt emotionally, or intruded on. Sometimes, even as an adult, way into adulthood, it can still be their parents that if they become a successful lawyer or doctor or whatever it is that was revered in their family, that finally their family would leave them alone and stop intruding or criticizing or inserting themselves. That it also um, gives them control in the sense of if they're in their career and say they're a successful lawyer, in each meeting they go into, they have a lot more control than in a social interaction or on a date,
Right.
where they control who they meet with, for how long, how it goes, etc. And it can also serve in a way as a replacement connection, sort of piecing together the different connections they have through work or contact. So it can feel like in a way, work becomes the relationship, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean that's similar to how people that I mean it's a different conversation, but it reminds me similarly to how people that are even like say secular when it comes to their positions on things still like end up taking up some new kind of secular like philosophy or view. It almost replaces like this what some term to be this like this god hole, right? That some people possess. Like it's like it's a way to replace a something that might be ingrained in the human, like social connection, because we are social creatures, and then attempting to fill that hole with something, an object almost, right, or a concept or an idea. Um, but what's interesting is that's I've heard that argument be posed before. I agree with aspects of it. The part that interests me is like you said, they're trying to replace something, or they're trying to I guess find something to like almost like a, what do you call it, a homunculus of sorts. But I think what's happening oftentimes, and this is what I don't think it's discussed, is if one were to delve deeper into why they can't do these things and why they feel they need to create barriers between themselves and others, most of the time, at least by my experience, you often find that it's not motivated by a sense of rejection or a fear of rejection that you would often find, say, in someone that's avoidant, unless you have a combination of both. You're you're dealing with somebody that is trying to stay away from oftentimes what seems to be existential alienation, uh, a lack of human connection as a whole, not just a fear of human connection, right? Because it that could fall that could be involved, of course, but it seems to be more of a discomfort or existential kind of discomfort or horror that comes with attempting to connect to people via the methods that you only have a point of reference to, which is, you know, obviously mimicking your environment, your social environment, and then seeing other people able to connect using those methods, or seeing other people do those methods intuitively, and then you yourself attempting them. One, they're not intuitive, you're almost like mimicking, and then attempting them and then successfully, say, getting you through things socially, or getting you to the next time you get to be left alone, but unsuccessfully able to actually form a connection, to actually get a reward out of the situation, right? Like they make friends, but they get no reward from making friends. they they have a girlfriend, but they get no reward from the relationship other than, oh, people will leave me alone because now I have a girlfriend, and that's normal, and that's what you're supposed to have, or a boyfriend or whatever, right? Or I believe that that's what that would make me happy, right? Because that's what other people seem to be happy, like people are happy when they're in a relationship, so maybe if I find a relationship I will also be happy. And then they find one and they feel nothing, right? Or they feel very little, or they don't connect in the same way that their partner does to them. And oftentimes I see that, right? I can imagine a schizoid in their search for meaning, in their search for connection, getting married, having children, right? And if they don't understand, or they don't have the actual appropriate motivations for those things other than, I'm trying to connect to something, I'm trying to find something, they might end up in a situation that is actually more difficult for them than had they not gone down that route necessarily, right? I'm not saying that's every situation, because obviously I love my kids and I love my wife, but I had to go through specific changes inside myself and thinking in order to kind of attain and figure out where those connections are coming from and how those connections developed and all this sort of stuff, right? I had to go through my own channels, my own way of finding connections, because the way they connect to me is not the same way I connect to them, if that makes any
That's
sense.
very interesting. I hadn't thought about that before.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious to what you guys think, like, because nobody really asks that, right? It's always about what safety from but it's not rejection. Every person I've come across, it's not rejection they're describing. They're describing disconnect. They're describing alienation. They're describing misunderstanding, misattribution, right? They have feelings. They try to express those feelings, but then those feelings are misattributed or misunderstood because they're weird or eccentric or a little bit cold or distant, at least in accordance to what is normal, what is normative when it comes to intimacy or relationships.
You know, what
Your
you're
thoughts?
saying is very interesting to me, and I hear things along similar lines, maybe not exactly what you're saying, but similar from my clients with more sort of pure schizoid themes.
Mhm.
The ones I have that we're calling Narzoid with narcissistic defenses, they do talk about intense fears of rejection. They do have some of the existential difficulty connecting, but they don't talk about that as frequently, or it's not as central. They're all, to me at least, they talk a lot about fear of rejection, and they talk a lot about having no idea how they would actually connect. Say the other person
Yeah.
was good enough and they were interested, and then the other person was interested in them, then what? Then what do they do?
No. Yeah.
And that, you know, that becomes really anxiety producing, combined with the fear of rejection. But I do think there's probably some of what you're talking about maybe underlying that is more difficult for them to access, perhaps, than for you. I hear it more with my clients without the narcissistic themes who have schizoid. Yeah. What
Look,
do you,
I mean that's really interesting. Because I think oftentimes I think about how that's why I kind of want to move away a little bit from the Narzoid part and try to maybe for time's sake talk about other comorbids and some manifestations I've seen, at least based on, and of course it's anecdotal what I experience because it's people having conversations with me, people that say they have these diagnoses in conjunction with each other and then describe their experiences to me. So again, all anecdotal, but I'm just trying to bounce it off you guys since you have more experience. Um, so what's important to me is this theme I described, right, of this disconnect, this more like there might be a safety component, but the safety component seems to not be in relation to the people rejecting them most of the time, but a rejection of their own identity or an inability to find an identity in a world that they feel disconnected from. And the existential discomfort or the the crisis, the identity crisis essentially that this causes is what they're trying to stay safe from a lot of the times, right? Because you can't, like, how do you put those things together? I am a human being. I can't connect to these people the same way everyone seems around me to be able to connect. I'm connected to things that everyone around me doesn't connect to the same way. Am I human? Am I a person? Do I have an identity? Or is an identity only what other people describe to around me in the world to be, right? Like this is what an identity looks like. This is what the media, my peers, my family, my whoever describes what an identity or a sense of self and what things are valuable, right? And so like there's certain things that are intuitively valuable to the average human being that I often find are not the case with a lot of the schizoids that I talk to. And so because of that reason, and again, it's just my thoughts on the matter, because of that reason, I oftentimes see very strange or eccentric variations of comorbidity, right? So like, for example, so I can move on to it a little bit, like somebody that's say BPD, right? And also diagnosed BPD and diagnosed schizoid or something of that nature. What's interesting about them is oftentimes they don't even realize that there is some BPD components to them until they actually develop or find an individual they can even manage to connect with. right? It's not until they actually find a person they can connect with on this kind of different way, or parasocially a lot of the time. Not parasocially. What's the word? Erotomania, right? Is that where you fall in love, or you become like a fantasy where you're like in love, or you think they love you and you love them, but they don't even know who you are. They don't even know
Yes,
you exist.
I had described a client like that from my early practice who had a folia due with her mother. Her mother encouraged her in it, and they themselves were isolated, and they would go from sports. The person was a famous sports figure that the young woman fixated on, and they would go and try and meet them at the sports games over and over, and they lived to find ways of meeting that guy who, when I explored with the young woman what she expected, what from him, because she was a fan, and the expectations, she didn't have a clear expectation, just something positive would happen, and they'd see that we were, meant for each other. I mean, it hadn't been articulated logically because it couldn't, I think because it couldn't stand up to logic. So they never got so far. Her mother never asked her that question. And so she had no prep for it. But the fantasy was there'd be something magical happening, and they would connect. But there was I think they didn't get as far as articulating it really, except in a fantasy-like way, because if they did, then they would have had to hold it up to reality, and it wouldn't hold water. It just didn't make sense, the whole thing.
No,
But,
yeah.
So that would be an example of what you're
like
you're
erotomania, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. That's the closest I've seen it in my practice. And that was too early for me to even know what to do with the person. I ended up giving them their money back. I said, I really can't treat you. I don't think I've done anything any good for you. I'd like to give you your money back.
That's very noble.
And well, it saved my conscience, because I didn't understand then that person was going to complain forever, that it wasn't my ineptitude.
That's relatable, by the way. Like, that's relatable, the idea of like, if I didn't provide what I'm supposed to, I don't want to be rewarded.
I was thinking about what you were saying, Angst, about that it only or I think my understanding of what you were saying.
Yeah, of course.
About when the schizoid, the person with SPD, gets in contact with another person, or finally gets into a relationship of some kind, and that's when some of the borderline defenses or traits become more obvious. Is that?
Yeah, it's well, because it takes a very specific kind of person. Like, for example, okay, let me give you an example without giving things away, right? About people. It's just, I've seen situations in which somebody has never been able to connect to anybody in a romantic way, right? And then they manage to, and for the first time ever, because this other person is like them, right? Say they're both schizoid or something like that. And they are then able to relate and connect to each other on this kind of similar playing field. And it isn't until that occurs that they start actually tapping into the emotional range that they normally had shut away most of the time. That's kind of what I'm saying, yes. And then they start going, oh, I'm having these feelings of, what is this trash? Like, what are these feelings I'm feeling? This like discomfort, this insecurity, right? Well, what the hell is this about? Like, this is not something I normally feel. And then they start actually acknowledging it and going, what is happening to me, right?
Well, I have something there. I don't have that with the clients that I'm concerned with what their diagnosis is.
Okay.
That's really common. My most insightful clients are my schizoid clients. So they're more likely to question, as I said in earlier ones, they're more likely to have researched me for a year before they decided to come. They're more likely to know a differential between schizoid and narcissist than most therapists are. And so they're the ones that are doing that kind of reflection in that worried, concerned way. The other ones that I'm thinking of, that just doesn't happen. Like, and if they're more defended, it doesn't happen, like the folio erotomania sports figure thing going on that was supported sufficiently by the mother that the young woman had no reason to do that. And my narcissistic clients will not self-reflect unless they're in crisis and they're really, everything is stripped away and they're about to lose everything. Yeah. And then that's their sweet spot for therapy, really, when something can get done, the armor goes down. So I'm not going to hear from a narcissist, I wonder why I did that. That doesn't happen.
I actually do see it with my clients.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do, where they'll be numb. They'll go through a period of being numb, and then they'll get into a heavily erotic, sexually based relationship after relationship of different kinds, whether it's BDSM, whether it's sex only kinds of things. And they'll talk about they're feeling something, that they went from sort of questioning their existence or being numb or not feeling much to suddenly feeling a lot. And I do actually see that.
In the mixed or only in the all schizoid?
I see it with schizoid that has some borderline defenses. I think the most is where I see that.
Okay.
That's interesting. Could you give a description so I can follow along and know a general description of what that would look like, a schizoid with borderline defenses?
Sure. So they'll go through a period where they are very self-aware, but they know that they feel more numb than they want to feel, that they're having trouble feeling something. It feels sort of depressing. There's sort of an existential disconnection, and often not feeling motivated or sort of isolated more and more. And then there'll be a switch where something will pique their interest, or a person, and they'll kind of dive in, and the whole thing can sometimes overtake them to the point where they don't, then they're in it, and sometimes it's more than they bargained for. But they'll say, but then they'll say, but now I'm feeling something. And that feels exciting, because at least it's not this sort of nothing kind of stymic, depressed sort of nothing,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's interesting, because like I've heard that multiple times as well. But what I find fascinating though is that like a lot of the times, like, okay, let me hear like an example of kind of what you described that I've seen is, okay, you have a schizoid. Most of the time, most days, everything's flat, everything's gray. They're disconnected. They're feeling anhedonic. They're feeling a lot of evolution or whatever, right? And then they'll find a person, or sometimes it's a person, sometimes it's an actual person they know, and sometimes it's a person that they become like infatuated with on the internet or something, right? Or on whatever the situation, a movie, or I don't know, the character sometimes even, right? It doesn't even have to be a real person. It could be a fictional character, if you will. I've seen, but when they'll fall in love with or they'll become enamored with the notion that that person or that individual represents, the thing, right? The concept, the idea, the fantasy of what that person is, right? And oftentimes when they actually end up interacting with that person, and it leads to similar feelings of disconnect and alienation, or this person doesn't understand me, this person doesn't actually connect to me the way I imagine they would, and things like that. They kind of panic in a similar fashion that somebody that's BPD in a relationship panics when it comes to like their partner either rejecting or doing something that doesn't fall in line with their sense of love, or feeling like they're loved, or and like and it's interesting because like but they're really self-aware, so they'll be like, I know I'm having these intrusive thoughts. I know I'm having these irrational, intrusive thoughts that are making me feel like something's very, very wrong, and I'm feeling very, very anxious. But at the same time, I can't get it out. Like I can't just have a good cry, or I feel empty and I feel dead. But I know I'm very, very anxious because this person, something to do with this individual, this person that I'm interacting with or imagining myself interacting with or whatever. And like I'll see them kind of go through these up and downs, and I guess would be the schizoid equivalent of an emotional roller coaster. But because they're so oftentimes disassociated from their own emotional range, it just feels like a lot of physiological discomfort and something gnawing at them and bothering them and making them like just want to bury themselves in a hole or just not exist, or just be gone. They don't want to live or whatever. But they won't be able to really describe it the same way somebody say that's just BPD would be able to, where it's like, I'm feeling like this is making me feel like this. It's more of like a just a lot of like a whirlwind of weird internal turmoil they can't quite grasp, right? They can't quite touch. And it's funny because I've seen this too with, I guess, since we talked about like the narcissistic schizoid, if they have status anxiety, right? If they in fact have status anxiety that comes with being a narcissist, sometimes they'll be triggered by situations that normally would cause in a narcissist status anxiety, and so that would provoke either a panic or anger or something like that. But instead of getting those types of situations or emotions, they just end up feeling very anxious and uncomfortable and confused and erratic, right? Like they don't understand what's happening with their body, they don't understand what's happening with their feelings, they just feel overwhelmed and engulfed, right? And it's being triggered by what would be a trigger for somebody with a specific type of comorbidity or issue, right? Whether it's BPD, whether it's avoidant, whether it's histrionic or otherwise, right? They'll have like a very kind of unique twist and reaction to what would conventionally be the triggers and responses to people that aren't schizoid. So, or aren't as disassociated from their identity or their emotions, right? Or sense of self. And I find it really, really interesting, right? Like even if somebody is schizoid and avoidant, I've seen situations where they feel very, very uncomfortable by, say, rejection, similar obviously to somebody that's avoidant, but instead of reacting like someone that's avoidant, they either don't react or internalize it or philosophize on it or try to figure out or intellectualize it in some capacity and try to figure out what the fuck is going on with them, right? They're just like, what are these things happening to me? Am I losing my mind? I'm having emotions I can't translate or figure out. I'm having feelings come at me that I can't, put two and two together here. This isn't making sense to me.
So I have
And
an example of that, if you
yeah.
don't mind me, but it isn't with somebody that I thought had any comorbidity with any other diagnosis, but they were almost exactly like what you were describing. I've seen that, and it's in the person, and again, it was way back when I didn't know. So, I work as a Gestalt therapist. I can work with what's ever in front of me. So I knew how to work, but I didn't know really what I was seeing. You just described it like super beautifully, and I wish I had known you back then. But what this person described, and I may have mentioned it at another time, but it just fit what you were saying, is he came into therapy. He was really, really surprised, confused, however you describe that. And what had happened was he had a roommate he didn't particularly like because she was messy. And she was borderline. The roommate appeared to be borderline from his description. He didn't use those terms, but she was very emotional and she
Messy
didn't keep
relationships, all that stuff.
very messy, very messy. And the roommate, he thought he would be happy to get rid of her as a roommate. But when she left, he was totally confused because he longed for her to return. He felt, he said, I never expected to miss her. I never expected to be this confused by my feelings. I mean, why do I want her now and feel like I have to get her back? And I have all these feelings for her, yet objectively, which is what you were talking about, analyzing it, she's messy. I didn't think I liked her. I found her overwhelming with all her emotions and her stuff. And now I realize I'm in love with her. Or that's the closest he could come to labeling what he thought. And
he has some connection to this individual.
Yeah. And it came as a complete surprise to him. And how strong that connection was, because on the surface level, he mostly felt annoyance when she was living with him as a roommate.
Interesting.
So does that fit the picture?
No, yeah, that definitely, I can imagine a situation in which, like, say somebody, a schizoid becomes infatuated by the chaos or the emotional range and excitement and novelty that comes with a person that isn't anything like them, right? And it could anger them, it could be frustrating, but there's probably moments in which that person was exhibiting this behavior when it wasn't directed at them that they found novel and interesting and fascinating about them. You know what I'm saying? So like somebody that's like, it's funny because I know a few schizoids that like to follow things like online drama, right? So they follow drama and crazy stuff like that, but they would never participate in it. They think it's all stupid and dumb, but they can't help but look at these train wrecks, right? And they're always like on these online battles, people arguing with each other. This person doesn't like this person on Twitter and blah, blah, blah. And everyone's calling each other all kinds of names and stuff. And they're just sitting there like, like, this is so interesting. But they would never want to participate or be a part of it or be anywhere near or have any of it directed toward them. They just like really interested in what's happening, right? Because it's something so novel and strange because they can't imagine themselves in a situation in which they would care about being involved, right? So I can imagine something like that occurring. I think I've seen it before. I'm curious, Karen, what do you think about some of these things, especially what Elinor just mentioned? Like, have you seen similar? Or
I have. One of my clients, when I first started working with them, and they couldn't articulate as well as you did about the confusion. And
I'm just rambling, honestly. I really don't
well,
articulate things. I
to me,
don't think so.
anyway. Well, it's really well articulated, but it doesn't have to be to you. But
yeah.
So we started exploring what she feels in her body as a place to start, because that was more accessible. And she said it was sort of like one of those old TVs when the cable doesn't work and it goes all black and white.
Yeah, it's static and the white noise and all that.
Yeah,
Static,
sometimes it was like that. And sometimes it was like a crazy washing machine that was just kind of going around in all different directions and was very dysregulating, and that's what her abdomen felt like. Like,
yeah, I know exactly what that feels like because I can relate to that extremely well, as some people that watch my streams have seen me go through exactly what you're describing on live, which is because that's why I do my streams generally, no matter how bad or no matter how shitty my day is going or how bad I feel, unless it's just I'm completely just non-functioning. Generally I'll still do it, right? So I'll just be sitting there staring at the camera, not moving, or just listening to music if I just don't feel like interacting. But I still put it out there because I feel like people need to see it. They need to see the ugly parts of things, the difficult stuff, the hardship, right? They need to see that a lot of schizoids are suffering. And that's something that schizoids don't often show. And so I said, fuck it, I'm showing it. And there's situations in which this happens. I'm having like, and they've seen it, I'm having tears stream down my face, but I feel nothing. Right? I'm having a physiological response. I got tears. My throat is like got a frog in it. My chest is tight. Um, if I'm anxious, my heart is beating, right? And I'm angry because usually anger is the only emotion. That's why it's schizoid angst. Anger is the only emotion I can really tap into very easily. But I get angry because I'm like, I want catharsis. I just want to cry, right? I want to cry. I want to get it out. I see the other humans do it. They can cry, and when they cry, they feel better, right? And I'm crying, but I'm not feeling any catharsis. I'm feeling empty and devoid, right? And at the end of it, I'm exhausted, like anyone would be exhausted if they had a big cry, right? Say you even had a big cathartic cry, right? You would still feel physically tired, right? There'd be some physiological effect from going through that stage, right? Through those emotions. I'm getting all the physiological effects, but I'm not getting any of the catharsis, right? So and that's not to say I never have that occur, because I have had that occur, but they're very rare, and it usually takes an extreme amount before like my defenses or whatever, or my adaptations will allow this to, like, it's just like a levee that breaks, right? And then I go into like a severe depression, right? And then things like suicidal ideation and other stuff can prop up, which is not fun. So but it is interesting, and I've had a lot of schizoids describe this sensation to me. It's almost like a, I know you guys are familiar with the term alexithymia, right? It's almost like a temporary or an alexithymia that's like,
Would you define it? I have to look it up every time I
okay,
see it.
alexithymia is basically somebody that has a disconnect from their emotional states and their physiological response. So like they can have a physiological response, like it's an emotion, but they don't actually connect to their emotions. So they don't know why they feel why their body is reacting the way it does. Like they don't actually connect to the feelings, right? So it's like, oh, I feel anxious, but nothing bad's happening. Good things are happening, I think, but I feel kind of anxious, and that's like, what would be the feeling of anxiety you would have from excitement, right? Or like looking forward to something, right? And but they might get the physical stuff, but they don't know what's happening. Like there's a brain emotion connection, like a dysregulation there, right?
I see
So
that a lot. I see it. I've seen clients crying who I ask what they're feeling, and they're not in touch with. I do see that disconnect. That disconnect is pretty common,
mhm.
but I've even seen it. By the way, I just want to thank you for something. You and Burr both, the abstraction
Oh
concept.
yeah, oh yeah. I
And it
didn't want to
works
get into
really,
it here because we
but
always get
but but
into it, but
but
yeah.
but let me tell you who it works with also. It doesn't just work with my schizoid clients. It works with my narcissistic clients to talk about something somewhat
Oh,
removed, because then they don't feel shamed. So we're talking
okay.
about the general topic of what people say to each other rather than what you just said to me and I just said to you. And so I go to the next abstract level, and I have been doing it rather automatically, but once you and Burb start talking about it and
That
Karen
makes
started talking
sense.
about it, it really is a very helpful concept. And if nothing gets out to any other therapist who's listening rather than that, I recommend that maybe you might know which of the ones that we really talked about it a lot, about this abstraction as a
Yeah.
way of communication. And Burb
It's,
would talk about he had to find that middle ground. He didn't use
yeah,
that word.
equidistant, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so what I found is that's a very useful concept if you're doing it if the therapist is doing it consciously, so that there's a safer connection. And now safety means something different to a
Yeah.
narcissist than it does to a zoid, but it's been tremendously useful to me. So I just wanted
That's
to thank you
interesting.
again and emphasize, because I didn't listen to your shows with the other therapists, but I think that that's one of the most interesting, immediately useful things that you can teach us.
What's funny is, like, I'm being totally transparent here. Like when you told me that, all that's going through my brain is, what does that mean to what I'm trying to do? Like my brain automatically just discards the
I can,
compliment part. Like it's really funny. I'm not like I don't care that you
yeah.
did it. It doesn't make me uncomfortable a bit. But like my brain automatically discards all the compliment stuff you're saying, and automatically went to, oh, that's an interesting connection. And then that's all it was going through my head. And so the only thing that popped into my head when you said that stuff was, oh, it sounds essentially like a reverse mindfulness. Like it's interesting in the sense it's like a reverse, because mindfulness often refers to, isn't it, like the present and grounding and being in the moment and seeing what's in front of you, and being in the very concrete and the moment. Like I feel like it's almost like a reverse, that you're separating yourself from the present, you're separating yourself from like more equidistant or grounded concepts in order to be in a safer place to discuss things, so that it doesn't provoke triggers or anxieties or status anxiety in this case or something like that. So it's interesting. It's interesting that actually, like, ruminating on an abstract idea of what represents something more equidistant in order to kind of work with it is kind of the opposite, because like that's interesting to me. That's funny.
It is, and where it relates to is, I'll relate it to one of the things that you stated to me was one of your goals, and that we both share this goal, that you be able to be taken very seriously, the body of knowledge that you and Burb have acquired, and the hundreds of hours, however many hours there are, of the stuff that you've put together. And how do you connect to therapists who need this information, and many who will pay for the information, because it's always a thing of trying to keep your body, mind, and bills together, while trying to do this wonderful service for people. And so the connection that I'm making is this is something that I would have paid money to get.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So does that connect with you?
Well, thank you. Like,
so what are you selling? I'm a natural marketer by trade.
I know, you told me. You told me.
And so
Pitch me.
if I were
Pitch me.
going to be you in market, I would say I have a few concepts that, and this is, I'm not being you, but I'm being me. I have a few concepts that I think would be immediately useful to you, that I've packaged, that I could put in the context of just an hour conversation with you if you're interested.
Yeah, we can talk sometime about that.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I like how it was this time Elinor that took us off on a tangent. It's usually me. I like how usually I'm the one that drops like tangents and non sequiturs. It was somebody else's turn, and I'm really happy about it this time.
Good.
I found that concept of abstraction so useful also. And I agree about with schizoid, but also with narcissist, and with clients who are having trouble, both for me to understand what's happening for them, like why they just went general or plural, but or meta, sort of in terms of level of abstraction, but also for clients who actively really want to improve social skills or want their interactions with their with family, with work, or in different situations, for them to have a better understanding of where disconnects might be happening. Sometimes I'll introduce the idea, and if they're okay with it, they'll ask me to point out if I notice. Sometimes they don't realize. Sometimes they do realize they've started to abstract, and sometimes they don't. Or sometimes they'll do it when a feeling comes up without being connected to what the feeling is.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and then I'll ask them, it seemed to me like you just abstracted there when you shifted to talking about XYZ. Did you feel that? Was that, what were you experiencing? Did you notice that, or what was happening on your end? And then it can also be this entry point to explore what the shift was that then made them want to abstract at that point.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying, because what's interesting, well, one thing I would like to differentiate between, say, the type of abstracting, at least in my opinion, the type of abstracting that a person does that's, say, helpful to them, like, say, somebody that's narcissistic or BPD or something else, like the method you're describing. The only thing I would differentiate there personally is that when somebody, okay, there, I can imagine people doing these things in order to stay safe, right, from the actual subject that they are trying to stay safe or away from, right? I can imagine people doing that. I can imagine that can be a very useful coping mechanism or a method of approaching subjects that are otherwise very difficult or need to be sort of baby stepped into, right? Like, so it's easier to talk about a story or a narrative that is similar to the one in their life than it is to talk about their actual life and what's happening in their life, right? Like if like they saw a movie where somebody experiences something similar to them and they start talking about what those experiences are, that's easier to deal with than talking about their own experiences, right? So I get that, but one thing I would pose that oftentimes for people schizoid or people just in what I often have described the schizophrenic spectrum is that those abstract places are the default. That's actually where the emotions often lie, right? Instead of actually being just a place to hide in, right? The oftentimes this is one of the problems that I've seen a lot of schizoids come across with their therapists, especially ones that don't specialize in it or anything, is that oftentimes they'll take this person abstracting, turn it into this is a pathology of them trying to basically stay away from the actual heart of the matter, right? But a lot of the times what's happening is that is the heart of the matter for them, right? Those weird eccentric abstract places, these meta places, are oftentimes where their heart is. And when the therapist keeps attempting to drag them back into the equidistant, to that middle playing field, like between the hyper concrete and the hyper abstract, they're taking them many times to a place where that's not where their emotions lie. And many times too, they're being told that it is, and that's what needs to change, right? And that actually causes them a lot of discomfort and sometimes trauma, because they're being they're having these things they are attached to be invalidated, and they're being told these things aren't the real thing. These things aren't where your feelings actually are. Your feelings are actually here and you can't deal with it, right? And they're sitting there over here, this is where they usually are, and they're going, wait, but those are where my feelings are, I think, right? Like that's where I feel things. But you're saying that's not where I feel things. So maybe that's not where I feel things then. And so then they're like thinking, well, where do I feel things then? If those aren't real feelings, I can't find my real feelings. I must not exist. Like, and so it's this is a consistent struggle I see all the time. And this is why a lot of schizoids have developed mistrust with the institutions of psychology, or they become infatuated with it because they're trying to figure out, okay, well then if these things are not what these are just mechanisms of me hiding, then where is the real me? I need to find it. So psychology will help me find it. Or they'll say, no, psychology is trying to suppress who I actually am, and they're bad. Like it's usually like these kind of two routes I often see. I'm just giving you what I anecdotally what I hear all the time from schizoids.
Is it okay if I jump in or
no, do it.
What you're saying?
Yeah.
You're right. Well, not that right or wrong, but I agree with what I think you're saying about there being sort of like two categories. And there's, say, one category of my clients with SPD who I do not do that with, because to what you're saying, if they're talking, say it's a political issue or an environmental or
spiritual, even
spiritual,
or whatever,
even a movie,
piece of fiction,
that is where the feeling is. That is the thing. Like it isn't masking the thing. That is the thing. What I was talking about are when they're not sure why they're having trouble connecting, and they're wanting to practice connecting with me as a way to practice connection for outside of the therapy room. and they're not sure, you know, what's the other person's experience of me like, or what might be happening where we diverge without realizing. So that was more what I was talking about when they're
Oh,
specifically.
okay. No, that makes sense. But also, as just a counter idea, is that what if the situation, and this is just a hypothetical, what if the situation is that not so much that there is this like they have this need to connect, right? So they're trying to figure out how to do it. But what if part of the problem, and it's not because of malevolence or anything like that. What if part of the problem is that the environment around them is going, it's not making any kind of attempt to connect to where they are, right? Their environment, their society, their neighbors, their family, their friends, whatever. These people just consider them eccentrics or something, right? And so when they end up trying to actually vocalize where they're emotionally attached to things, right? It's like, oh, this person is just really into this, or this person is just really obsessed with this topic or this thing, right? And it's kind of like that nobody goes to where they are, right? Nobody's coming to them. Everyone is expecting you to go to them, right? Everyone expects you to learn how to attach in their way, right? You have to attach in the normative way of attaching to people. These are the things that people generally value. These are the things that even the psychological community often says, oh, these are what is important. These are what's important to people, and these are the things you're staying away from, or whatever, or these are the things you're adapting against, or whatever. But like, what if there's a possibility that they're just sitting there going, I care about this stuff, and nobody cares. Nobody cares with me. Nobody wants to come to where I am. I have and what's really sad, and this is just my opinion, is that like I can imagine somebody actually develop almost a pathological need to invalidate their own emotional connections in order to replace them with what is supposed to be the correct ones. And so then this causes like a rift. So it's like if you don't have, if interpersonal connection is not your primary motivation and connection, but the world is telling you, oh, you need interpersonal connection of this type in this manner, and all your emotions lie elsewhere, you essentially like create like an internal contradiction.
Well,
It's weird, I know, but
can I interrupt and ask a couple of questions about that?
yeah, I love it.
Because it's a therapy dilemma.
Yeah, for sure.
I see a number of people where if I look at the whole picture, not just one thing that they're saying, there'll be a number of things that will be prominent. And this is before I make a diagnosis. I'm thinking someone who's a bit hard to diagnose, but it's the same type of thing where their stated thing is that they feel inadequate, they have low self-esteem. They spend part of their time trolling on the internet, in fact, because they want to have some form of an impact on people, and that feels like a safe impact, and sometimes get involved in relationships. But the part is that in addition to this, they focus and fixate on certain political candidates who then get elected, and then they feel tremendously disappointed because these particular clients feel like we're about to enter an apocalyptic situation where the whole world is dying, whether it's from heat, from politics, from things, and they're placing all their fear away from exactly what's happening to them and going abstract about the apocalypse coming. And from a therapeutic point of view, it may be, from your point of view, perhaps a mistaken thing that I'm thinking. So let's leave room for me to be mistaken, or us to have different feelings about it, I hope. But I know from having seen a lot of people like that, that people do in therapy externalize their fears about themselves onto the environment. During the Bay of Pigs thing, which many viewers will be too young to remember, under Kennedy, a dear friend of mine had a psychotic break, and he was convinced that the whole world was going to be blown up, but something personal was actually happening to him that was truly terrible. A suicidal parent, whatever, just he was facing something terrible.
No, yeah.
But instead of talking about what he was facing, which he never really spoke about emotionally, when it came to a head, he became, and he wasn't a person prone to psychosis, but he became delusional, and all around the Bay of Pigs. So those of us who knew him could put together that he had, that this really related to something internal for him rather than external. So in your cases where, there's situations where it could be both, they could be very preoccupied and have a natural interest in the safety of the planet, in all these causes. I'm not saying
it goes beyond a natural interest. That's what's funny. They can actually develop suffering and trauma from that connection.
That's
so, like,
right. That's what I'm seeing.
Yeah,
that's
what's
seeing.
interesting.
But the suffering and trauma, that is for some of my clients, and then we're back to the mixed diagnosis, easier suffering to bear. It's more like a phobia. Like I once developed a phobia, and the phobia encapsulated other things that I was more afraid of.
I could just quickly respond to what you were saying.
While
we wait for Karen.
Because I'm confused now, because the therapist in me, the person's had a zillion years of therapy, and it made little or no impact. I mean, and so I'm time sensitive because I'm 77, and they want to get on with their life, and nothing has made any impact. And my thinking, and again, it's mine, is that they're going to spend a lot of time, if I let them, talking about things that aren't going to change anything for them internally. Now, what's your thinking? Like,
this is what's interesting is okay. So, for example, imagine you are somebody that is preoccupied with something abstract, right? And their emotional connections lay in that realm. And then you go, these are the things that depress me, these are the things that anger me sincerely, these are the things that matter to me, right? And then everyone around you is going, no, that stuff you shouldn't ruminate on. That stuff doesn't matter. What matters is your life, and this is your life, and this is what's happening around you, and these are your relationships, and what matters is your interaction, your relationships with the people around you, and so on and so forth, right? And so this keeps getting imposed on you, even if it's not what you're about, right? And so then what ends up happening is you start essentially thinking that there's something wrong with you because you don't connect the way they do to the same things, and that you're connected elsewhere. You think that you're a crazy person or a broken human or whatever. I've heard a lot of phrases, a lot of self-hating phrases be used on themselves about like who they are, right? So the issue in response is that I think there needs to be a differentiation, right? I'm not saying either one is like the way or the other, right? I'm not saying what you described doesn't happen. That's silly. That happens all the time. It's probably more common than what I'm describing, right? But what I'm describing is a subset of people, and like I mentioned before, that have to do with this kind of schizophrenia spectrum, this kind of intuitive and abstract thinking, that might need a different approach. It might need a different kind of approach when it comes to like the therapy or what's being tapped into or what's being pathologized and what isn't. Because that's an issue, right? Like, for example, if someone is autistic, imagine we just pathologize them and say it's all OCD, right? It's all related to some kind of trauma that they become like hyper focused on details and order and structures and everything, right? And what if we didn't understand autism and we went, oh, so what's wrong with this person is the reason they're behaving in this manner regarding it becomes so the reason they have a meltdown when certain things aren't quite right is not because those things aren't quite right. It's because they have these emotional issues that they're hiding from and so on and so forth, right? We wouldn't do that with somebody that's autistic, right? We would be able to differentiate that, no, this person is having a meltdown an autistic meltdown because of the very thing that we're seeing in front of us. It's not some abstract thing. It's not some equidistant thing. It's literally, this causes them discomfort, this disorder, this disruption in their systems and in their schedule or whatever, right? It literally causes them physiological and psychological harm and discomfort, and that's why they're having a meltdown, right? That's why they're hitting themselves or stimming in some cases, right? It depends on the functionality, right? We're talking low to high function. Obviously, situations are very different. Sometimes they might just lash out and just feel really anxious and angry, want to be left alone, right? Because this thing caused some internal meltdown, and we wouldn't say, right, that those people are they're just masking something. And similarly, I think there is a subset of people that might be like what I'm describing, and I'm one of those people. Right? I think there's a subset of people that are not masking some kind of equidistant issue in their own life, right? In fact, they become so preoccupied with this abstract thing that they allow their entire equidistant life, or, equidistant meaning like neurotypical kind of middle of the road, right? Regular stuff like bills and love life and, stuff like that. They allow that stuff to degrade into nothing, right? It falls apart. Their house is in shambles. Depending on the level of schizophrenia, right, and all that, their house is in shambles. Their relationships are torn asunder. The bridges are burnt. So much of that stuff's gone. They're sitting there going, they don't care about any of that because they're so preoccupied with whatever abstract thing that they, decided to, I don't know, paint on their walls or write in a bunch of notebooks or become incredibly like preoccupied, whether it's the end of the world or some national crisis or something, right? Or some philosophical quandary or some religious thing, spiritual question. So it's funny because they're over there, actually connecting to that stuff, and everyone's just going, oh, well, they're by themselves in their own feelings, and no one's there with them because everyone's trying to bring them somewhere else they're not, right? Instead of going to where they are. And
I think you're making a good distinction because since meeting you in Berg and hearing your views on this thing, what's natural and should be met by the environment as natural to the person, and what's defensive, as we would say in my field, and should be altered perhaps for the person in order to reach their goals, to help them alter it, is I think we're going to find that there are different groups that are now being lumped on the heading of schizoid, and one will be more towards the schizophrenic, schizotypal, that end, where they're wired differently. Something
there's definitely a lumping in happening, yes.
Yeah, and I tend to see a few of those people where it's really very clear we're in a different playground than the other playground. And then I see a larger group because of the self-selection for the prices of private therapy and what have you, of people that I don't believe have that issue. I don't believe it's an organic issue with them. I believe it was a reaction to trauma. So I'm seeing people who, on one hand, there wasn't enough trauma in their life compared to what most people would find really, really super distressing, but it was enough for them to really make their life a total misery. And I'm not exactly sure why.
There's invisible traumas. That's why it's their invisible.
Yeah, and then it would go down to, well, wired differently, different priorities, different things. The world doesn't meet them where they are. But the other side is I see all those other people that I don't think belong in that group, and they had it's quite understandable. They might have had a predisposition to certain types of sensitivities. And a lot of them, a disproportionate amount of my clients are poets in that category, and very sensitive souls. But Karen, is Karen back?
Yeah, Karen's trying to, I think Karen wants to respond
I like what you're both saying about the distinctions, because I also tend to see people more on the schizoid end as opposed to schizotypal schizophrenic end. But even on the schizoid end, what I'll see is often is a frustration that people are not adapting enough to them. So that part, like that's one of a long-standing unmet need, but at the same time, often they'll have practical concerns, like they want to keep a job
Mhm.
and they're getting frustrated
Oh yeah,
because
yeah. It's not
they
like they're
keep
totally gone, right? Like
right.
no, that's not what I'm saying at
And
all. That's why it's interesting. It's kind of like high functioning and low functioning
yeah,
autism is like I feel like the schizoid is oftentimes the high functioning schizo. And the person that's maybe more in the paranoid schizotypal end becomes more low functioning
right.
when it comes to certain things like that.
Right. So on one hand, they're really often angry and frustrated that they're not feeling seen. No, they don't feel adjusted to, like in say their place of work, and they're resentful that they have to continually adjust and mask and do all of these things. On the other hand, they want to be able to keep a job, to have some autonomy and
Mhm.
safety, and
Yes.
figure out, okay, well, it's not fair that the world that I have to do, I meaning them, that they have to do so much adjusting to everybody else. But if they're going to have to do this to survive in some of these contexts and maintain a job, then how do you do that more
Uh,
effectively, kind of thing? Even though it's
Absolutely.
unfair, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I just a quick thought that popped in my head reading what you just said, Karen, is that the way I would see it is that the schizoid is able to understand that they need the kind of middle, they need the normal playground or the normal area, the
Mhm.
equidistant. They need it in order to achieve their kind of some oftentimes different sort of goals, right? Sometimes somewhat eccentric or idiosyncratic goals, right? So they understand, oh, I need to, keep the body and the home intact in order to have any chance at actually having the the being left alone portion so that I can actually attain or work toward what are my actual goals, which have nothing to do as much with those things, except for that they facilitate what my more kind of different sort of goal might be, right? And then somebody that's further in disconnects from those equidistant things and thinks the goal is everything, right? And they think they lose track of how it is that normal sort of stuff can facilitate them actually achieving those goals, right? So it just becomes an obsession with that target, right? That which is giving them their, I guess, their dopamine, right? It's that target, that enemy, or that goal, whatever it is, that thing that they have to combat or rise up to, right? Whether it's enlightenment or whatever. And so then they leave behind everything else, and they can't tell, hey, wait a minute, all those things I'm leaving behind could actually help me achieve this maybe more realistically. And I think a lot of schizoids are depressed because, and they go through a lot of dysthymia and anhedonia because they have these goals in mind that they just go, oh, that goal is not achievable in this world, right? This kind of really abstract goal or concern that I have is not cannot be remedied in the world I currently inhabit.
Can you
Cannot.
give an example? We're getting a
Uh,
little abstract for me to understand.
oh yeah, it's kind of like, okay, if your concern is the mitigation of useless or unproductive suffering, that's like me, right? The mitigation of unproductive suffering, uh, I just think, oh, okay, well, the only way to do that is for human beings to come to terms with the complete indifference and the universe has or possesses the innate unimportance of everything, and that they need to just value the fact that all they have is each other, in a different universe. And that's why we need to be kind to each other and protect to each other, because all these other things don't matter, right? Because all these other things don't have innate value, because I'm a nihilist, right? In that sense, an optimistic nihilist. So I have this concern of like, if only people could just understand that, you know, it's okay that we don't have innate value, that we construct it, even if it's a fantasy, that's fine, but all we can do is help each other and love each other in some weird way. Like I know that's not an achievable goal. I know that's never going to happen. I know that that's not something I could even advocate for and realistically attain any kind of traction, because that's not how people work, and that's not what makes people usually go forward. And so I know that's unattainable in this world, and so that's depressing, and that distresses me, and that causes me feelings of why even do anything? Why even get up in the morning? Why even care about anything? Because everyone else is out there just killing each other over this argument about how everything, my thing has innate value and your thing doesn't, and mine does and yours doesn't. People are killing each other and fighting over this, right? Instead of just coming together under this banner of the none of it matters, you know. So like, if that makes any sense. And so like I that's how I perceive the world, whether it's incorrect or correct, but it's correct to me.
I have a question, and maybe an unwelcome one, and if so, feel free to just segue to something
No,
else.
that's fine. I don't care.
Okay, because, well, if we apply, if it's here's my thinking. I was thinking I'd be really interested in talking with Angst about how what he's saying, this disappointment and what's the use, etc., about trying to connect because it's never going to work, actually applies to sitting here with Karen. You know, we're not sitting together, but with Karen and me discussing these things about schizoid. And so I was thinking about that. And then I thought, well, I would throw it over to you if that interested you. And
well, are you saying like the contradiction? Like of like, if nothing matters and everything's pointless, why am I here doing these things at all?
Well,
like what motivates me?
No.
Oh, I'm misunderstanding
I'm going less meta. I'm going much less abstract.
Maybe Karen, can you translate? I'm not.
So what I think you're saying or asking, Angst, is if sitting here with the two of us and any anxiety about how this will go or whether we're getting across what you're wanting to get across is getting maybe abstracted into the more meta version.
No, absolutely. Like, for example, if for some reason my efforts with you guys and like, let's just say, I don't imagine this happening, but like, let's just say one day one of you just go, you know what, Angst, you're stupid, fuck your project, I'm out, this is dumb, you're stupid, you don't know anything, right? Like, I would be less disappointed with, oh no, Karen and, you know, Elinor said mean things to me and said I'm stupid. I'd be like not even bothered by that. I'd be bothered by like, oh God, I knew it. Like, this is just another example of people just having, you know, some ideas challenged, and so thus, because those ideas got challenged, they then, you know, spiraled into turning me into a bad object, which in turn just facilitates further misery for the people that I'm trying to help. And those people are suffering similar miseries as me that are associated to this feeling of just like hopelessness and so on and so forth. Like, and so like, that's where my emotions would go, right? Like, I would like.
But that doesn't answer my question, really.
Okay, I don't know your question.
Okay. Once you take it into a hypothetical future, then we're back in the abstract.
Yes.
So I was asking basically whether you were willing or able to comment in the present about this interaction, only this interaction.
Oh, only this interaction in particular?
With the three of us, and how that relates to your theme of no.
Oh yeah, it's positive. I mean, that's why I'm an optimistic one. So like, so my theme is, okay, this is me fighting against this hopelessness and the complete nihilism taking over inside of me, right? So I'm combating it by, even if it's in my mind somewhat absurd, right? I'm combating it regardless of my pessimism, right? By going
Today, now,
right now, yes.
yeah.
So in my mind, I'm going, you know what? Like, I could sit here and lay there and not move and go, what's the point of meeting with Karen and Elinor? It's not going to change anything. It's not going to, people are going to keep doing this stuff. People are never going to care about schizoids. People are never going to care about metacognate enough to understand other types of people and able to do that. Like, it's never going to happen. I can do that. I can go down those paths. But something in me, and it might just be a unique aspect of my own personality, says, no, fuck that. I need to do something. I'm going to go down fighting. I'm going to go down fighting. I'm going to go down in flames if I have to. I am going to fight to the bitter end. So I will be in that meeting with them. And I am now. And I'm fighting for what I believe in and what I care about. Um, and it's kind of like, this is just an instantiation, a small instantiation of what my more abstract goals are, right? And I'm just trying to do what I can do realistically. So I come to terms with that. And it's still disheartening, but it is what it is, right? I know I'm going to die long before I make any probably major change in this department. And I'm okay with that. But at least I'm getting some snowball going, right? That's how I see it. And so in the present, as far as the situation, I see it as a happy moment. It's a good thing because I'm talking to you guys and you guys give a shit. And we're talking about these things, and that allows other people to listen to this that are like me and go, oh, look, people give a shit. That's nice. Maybe there's some hope. Maybe it isn't all despair and doom and gloom or emptiness, or maybe it staves off for another day or two that suicidal ideation that some of us deal with. And if that's what it's doing, then good. If this video does that, then good.
Thank you. Thank you for answering.
That took a lot out of me, I'll be honest with you. Like, I'm like really emotionally drained by that answer.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. Like, I'm not saying it was
That's
a bad
okay.
question. I'm not saying it was a bad question. It's a really difficult subject for me to discuss. The more abstract stuff is difficult for me because I'm actually emotional there.
Yeah, that's why I asked it, and that's why I would try to give you a lot of room to say
No,
no.
for sure, no.
But
I'm such a son of a bitch. So like, I just go right into the pain, right? So
I know you get really bold. So that's why I felt okay formulating it in my mind and then checking it, because that's what I was really curious about myself. In addition to the larger meta project, which I think we're all on board with. We all want to see people treated better. We all want to have space. I'll speak for myself. I want to have space that people are treated better, that people get their needs met, that people aren't made to feel that they're ridiculous because they have a need that person over A doesn't have. So I'm
for sure.
So on the larger level, I'm in with a project that we're all doing.
That's good.
To facilitate that. On the personal level in here, I'm just kind of like checking in the present what it was like for you. I know it is, I can't tell sometimes, and that's fine. So that's why I asked, because I have no idea sometimes when you're going, well, okay, what's it like for him right now at this moment? And that's where I was going with that. So do you want to do a wrap up?
Yeah, could you, Karen, too?
Karen, did you have anything?
Your thoughts on this discussion, how it went?
Yeah,
what you got out of it?
I really enjoyed this discussion, and I think one of the main reasons I do it is because people tell me it makes a difference. Seeing you, seeing my mom and I, seeing people talk about something that often people feel like they're the only one, or that it's really rare, and having something to relate to being so important and helpful. And so I find that exciting and motivating, and I think it helps. I really like when helping people to feel happier is not the word
Less
I'm wanting.
shitty.
Less shitty. Or
Less shitty.
you know,
I appreciate
or
that.
more balanced, or more of however they want to feel,
Yeah.
and less of whatever they don't want to feel. And
That's good.
There you go.
and so I really enjoy, and I love hearing you know, your personal take, as well as what you know, what people in your different groups talk about, and sort of all three of us where we kind
Hell yeah.
of agree or have differing kind of points of view gets really interesting to me. You know, so I really enjoyed it, and I'm happy to have been here.
I'm glad.
Me too.
Any last words there, Eleanor?
I pretty much
Yeah, I
said,
think you said you will.
yeah, I
Yeah.
pretty much finished with it. I'm really happy to be here. I'm delighted for Karen to have come on and joined us. And I believe that you guys are going to do one with Karen in the upcoming future.
Hopefully, yeah. I want to do it with
And
Karen specifically about certain things.
I love the idea that you're doing this and that there's a place for therapists in your world to come on and learn from you, and also maybe even, you know, be a bit challenging to the ideas to try and find
Well, I have no
what's actually
choice. I
going
have to put
on.
up some kind
Yeah.
of fight. It's
What?
part of the issue. But I know I'm smart enough to know that I can't like go whole hog, and I have to be very strategic and very reasonable about it, because I understand that my ideas are just my ideas, and that's why I want my ideas to be challenged. I want my ideas to be researched. I want my ideas and Verb's ideas to be, you know, studied and go, is there something to this? And be, what's the word? Responsibly, but also like, what's the word? Respectfully like looked at. Right? And it's like, oh, we feel these are valid and important ideas. Can someone with the ability to search, study, research, if you're out there, look over here, right? And look at these questions we have. Right? And look into them if you think there's some validity there.
Well, a quick takeaway. It's a very vast oversimplification, but I look for takeaways, things I can learn, things that I can bring back into my practice, my life. And one of the takeaways is to differentiate, and it's still up in the air for me. When is something defense, and when is it a true? It could be both. You see, there's three things that could be going on, and I'm still. It's complicated. The person's emotions could really be in that abstract place, and trying to get them away from it is trying to say, well, you shouldn't feel that way, or that's not where your emotion should be. You should change, etc. And so there's that thing where the therapist is misseeing what's going on and putting their own interpretation on it. If it were them or some other client, then that's what it would mean. And when my takeaway is, no, it may mean exactly what the person says it will mean, and not something else.
Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, right?
Yeah. And then there's the thing where it does mean exactly what they say, but there is also, it is A, but there is also B, and it's easier for them to talk in terms of A than to talk in terms of B, the personal. And then I have the third option over here, where some of my clients, when they go meta, it's a defensive thing, which I might join them in, because let's make this as easy as possible and as pleasant as possible. And if we get work done talking abstractly about something, then we are, and maybe it'll filter into the personal for the person on some level, and I'll be doing, see, I want to do good too.
Yeah.
So now we have these three categories of different ways, and I'm still leaving them loose because till I learn more. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, well, thanks guys for joining us. I'm glad all three of us are in the business of trying to mitigate as much suffering as our lives allow us to in the time span that we have. Right? And you guys are doing it your way, and I'm doing it my way. So
And I
Yep.
had one thing for future.
Elinor, I love it.
Interrupting. It is.
One
it's
more
just-
thing. One
because
more thing. I love it.
Because
Go
I don't
for it.
want
Do
to
it.
forget it.
Don't forget
is
it.
we took when we were on here, we talked very little about pleasure. We talk a lot about making the suicidalness a bit less suicidal, the desperation slightly less. So my
Oh, you want to
question,
talk the happy things?
yeah, well,
Oh,
my
there's
question
happy things. Yeah.
is, where do people find pleasure in the groups that you have
Yeah.
spoken
Yeah,
to?
that'd be a
It's for
fun
another
combo.
time, but I hate pleasure is a topic that I don't much hear on your
Okay.
channel.
That's a really good conversation. Well, we don't get a lot of it, let's just say, but definitely there are places where we find comfort and solace and coziness, as we like to describe. And so, if we'd like to do a conversation sometime on that subject, I'd be delighted. And I can get some more information out of the Zoids that I talk to about how they describe it. I can tell you sometime how I describe it.
I would
Okay.
love that topic.
You had
I
pleasure
would
too.
also love that topic.
Okay,
and-
well, I mean, it can be
Yeah.
both of you. I don't care. Whatever works.
yeah, and
Um,
sort of,
Where is the schizoid happy place, if there is one?
or whatever, or what you're right, happy place or balanced place or whatever place is their preference.
Cozy. There are
place.
cozy places. We have cozy places inside our minds.
Yeah,
Yes.
and do they notice things and what brings it up for them, and all of that is
Yeah.
it would be really interesting to me also.
Some of those cozy places are pretty weird, so be prepared for that. Okay.
Weird,
well,
okay.
yeah, it's fun. All right. Well, thanks a lot for listening in. Anyone here, I appreciate your time, both of you. I appreciate the time of anybody listening. If you like the show, if you like the recordings, please go to Patreon, support me there, or Ko-Fi, or just PayPal me. Any of that, all that money basically just goes toward me sustaining a living, so I can keep doing this more full time. Right. This is what I want to do with my life. Help Zoids and schizos alike too. And when I say schizos, I don't mean it in a pejorative way. I mean it like, and I want to take the word back, right? I want to take that word back. Anyway, I want people to not be ashamed of having schizo necessarily in their diagnoses, whether it's schizotype or schizoaffective or schizophrenic or schizoid. I want the word schizo to stop being a stigma. In any case, as usual, oh, by the way, did you guys want to mention anything, website or social media or anything? Follow me on so on.
I have, some of you may already know, I have a book out. The book was originally meant for therapists, to train therapists in a more delightful way. I'm about pleasure, delight, making it easier, using regular language. I didn't know, as opposed to alexithymia, where I have to study and remember what I'm going to talk about. So in this book, it's called Borderline Narcissistic and Schizoid Adaptations, The Pursuit of Love, Admiration, and Safety. And I only have one chapter directly only on schizoid dreams and contact anxiety and how the two relate. There's a lot of material, though, that I have in chapter 3 that is a long, rambling chapter. And that, chapter 3, which doesn't have schizoid as necessarily as the title, is the one where I have most of the information in. And I also write for Psychology Today, and they've allowed me to bring in other personality disorders into my blog called Understanding Narcissism. So I've been writing about schizoid in my narcissism blog, which is a little bit perplexing, but what the heck. So that's what I wanted to say. And thank you for inviting us on.
No, for sure. And follow her on Quora. She has a Quora, and she runs a group on Quora too. What's the name of the group again?
Well, it's not really a group. I have a space.
The space, yeah. What's the name of the space?
Called Bits of Wisdom.
Bits
and
of
I
Wisdom.
also feature other people who I find logical and interesting, and that they have wisdom. So wisdom comes in many forms. And I also have a concept that maybe go along with the do good thing about everyday heroes. I pick up things from other writers where they're celebrating somebody who did this unexpectedly wonderful thing that was very impactful, just part of the day, that didn't cost them $1 zillion. It was about people who within 20 feet of us on the internet or in person and that has a need, and we are uniquely placed without much trouble to ourselves of satisfying that. And in some cases, it's as easy as buying an ice cream cone for someone that forgot that to bring any money. It could be anything. So everyday heroes, I'm interested in people who quietly, discreetly make things better for other people for no other reason than they think things should be better and they enjoy it.
Okay, good.
Karen?
I think Karen took off. I think Karen had to
Okay.
go. I'm not too
All right.
sure.
Well, I'll
But in
go.
any case, yes, thank you for joining me, and thanks a lot for everything. And as usual, my sign off, when day is dark, always remember, happy day. Bye.